Okay, so I'm in the spare bedroom today. There's a picture of me on the wall there, largely to stop guests wanking when they come to stay. I'm recording once again on the laptop, hopefully for the last time. It's cost me 900 quid, £900, but finally the computer is back up and running again, so this should be the last time. Next month I'll be back on my PC again, being able to edit things properly. But I'll be closing out this month with 2 videos aimed at Steve Shives, which is not normally the way I'd like to do things. It seems kind of cheap, really, to make 2 responses to Steve Shives in a row. But he made a video, he had a hangout where he was talking about diversity and atheism. I wanted to comment on that, that's already made. And then I watched his latest video, and that is one I want to comment on here. Because honestly, it's one of the most depressing videos that I've ever seen. What Steve does in this video is that he gives us some examples of things which, well, I can only think in his mind, these are things that he's heard of, that as far as he's concerned, this is just a cut and dried case of sexism, and how could anybody possibly read anything different or see even the possibility of any alternative explanation? And even thinking of some kind of alternative explanation is just indicative of sexism in your mind, seemingly, as far as Steve is concerned. And I say it's depressing because if this is what we've come to, then I really don't ever see an end to it. I tell you, the best thing to do is that I'll play you Steve's arguments, right? And then I'll tell you what I think about them, right? But if you think that I'm wrong on this, I really want you to tell me. If you think, actually, no, I think Steve's right on this, and actually you're the one that's in the wrong, and his reasoning is right here, please let me know, because if I'm this far adrift, right, I'd rather know than not know. Okay, here's the first clip of Steve.
Last week, another woman I'm acquainted with posted on Facebook about how she had written an email to a guy about something business related and had received no response from him for several days. Then a male colleague of hers emailed the same guy about the same thing and received a response in a matter of hours. In the comments beneath that Facebook post, another guy said to my friend, well, maybe the first guy just didn't see your email. And the second guy's email is the one he responded to because that's the one he saw.
So maybe this just shows the depths to which my sexism runs deep, just the levels, the sheer horrific levels of unconscious bias that I have. But I couldn't really see how you're discounting that alternative explanation. In fact, so sexist and biased am I that immediately 2 others sprung to mind. One is the thing that I do. A week never goes by without me doing this, which is that somebody will email me on something and I'll think, yeah, I better watch that video, or I better respond to them, or I better do this, or I better action that, and I don't do anything about it. I forget. And then I get another email, maybe from the same person, maybe from another person, and I think, oh, bollocks, yeah, this is the same thing that other person told me about. I can't afford to forget it again. I better do something about it straight away. Or maybe he just doesn't like that woman very much, but does like the guy, right? And that's why he responded to the guy more quickly. And after all, as far as I'm aware, you are allowed to prefer some men to some women, and that's still not sexism. I'm sure if I sent you an email on a subject, Steve, and Christy Winters sent you an email on the same subject, that Christy Winters would get a response rather more quickly than I got a response, probably infinitely more quickly than I got a response from you. But that's not because you hate men, is it? It's not because you think, oh, I fucking hate men, I'm not going to respond to Noel because I hate men. It's just simply because personally, you can see me for the cunt that I am, whereas you can see what a marvellous person Christy is, so you'd respond to Christy and not to me. But anyway, this was what Steve's summing up of this situation was.
Perfectly reasonable explanation that also just so happens to exonerate the guy who ignored my friend's email of any possible display of sexist bias on his part, however unwittingly. It's all so very innocent.
Okay, so I've tried to answer this twice and it's just descended into a rant. So let me try and maintain a little bit of composure this time. This is the most mundane thing that I have ever heard. And by mundane, don't misinterpret this. I'm not saying this is like everyday sexism. This is what women have to survive every day. What by mundane I mean, you're describing something that happens to everybody. right? Where the victims, where the survivors are men and women, where the perpetrators are men and women. This is the most mundane fucking thing I've ever heard. In fact, this has happened to... I've lost track of how many times this has happened to me when it's me that's made both the emails, where I've emailed somebody. This needs sorting. I bought this, it's gone wrong. I need you to have a look at this. And I hear nothing. A week goes by, I hear nothing. So I email again and say, I emailed you a week ago about this, right? Below is a copy of my email. Please do something about it. And then 20 minutes later, I get a response. I'm ever so sorry, sir. Yes, I read your original email. I meant to respond. Forgot all about it. This cropped up, that cropped up. I'm sorry. We're on with it, or we will be on with it now. I'm the only person there, Steve. And it's happened to me. I would hope you would agree that in those circumstances that was not sexism, right? Because it's only me. I'm the only one. I'm the survivor, but I'm the only one. I mean, I've lost track of how many times I've gone. It's just so fucking mundane. How many times in my life I've gone to buy a drink at a bar, and the bar is rammed, you know, and the staff can't keep up that are serving. And I've been there 15 minutes, Steve. And then somebody else rocks up at the bar down the other end, and they wedge in there and they're waving their little banknote, and they get served 2 minutes later. And I'm thinking, who's the cunt here? I've been stood here 15 minutes. What is it about? Is it because it's a woman and she's dead pretty? Or is it because he's a man but he's a bit cooler than I am? Or he's only 5'6", I'm 6'2". Maybe they don't like tall people. Or maybe it's just my face. Or something, or maybe I look a bit too old, or I look a bit too aggressive, I'm being a bit too pushy, or I'm not being pushy enough. We try and rationalise it, don't we? That there must be some prejudice against us that led to it. But it's probably just the luck of the draw. They just happened, they're just randomly picking people, they've noticed them on that occasion, and I've just drawn the fucking short straw on that particular occasion. But what you're telling me is that if I was a woman stood at that bar and that guy had just rocked up, right, not only should all those other suggestions be discounted, but if anybody else should suggest them, then they are sexist. They are part of the problem for even suggesting that the reason that this other person got served first is for anything other than sexism. Because that's what you're saying here. Right, you're not just jumping to the conclusion that this is sexism, but you're saying that even if anybody says that, well, this is something that happens all the fucking time, and when it happens on other occasions, these are the kind of reasons it happens for, maybe that is the reason here, then they're part of the problem for not just saying, yes, it must be sexism because it was a woman who was the survivor and it was a man who was the evil perpetrator, it must be sexism. That's sexism in itself. Isn't that really fucked up, Steve? You know, and isn't that you're creating? This is what really depressed me about your video. You are conspiring to create a world. It's great for your channel. You're conspiring to create a world where it doesn't need sexism for you to find sexism. That if men and women are just exactly the same, if all our unconscious and conscious biases were just stripped away and all you were left with was fallible humans that fuck up, you would still be able to find myriad examples of what you would regard as sexism week in and week out, because whenever a bad thing happens to a woman and a man's on the other end of it, as far as you're concerned, that is prima facie evidence of sexism, and anybody who says anything to the contrary is part of the fucking solution. You know, it makes me think of, I know with this Mythicist Milwaukee thing, you were really pleased, weren't you, that the likes of Aaron Ra, Seth Andrews and Matt Dillahunty all roundly said what a twat Sargon of Akkad was. One thing that I noticed in that, they didn't mention you by name, Steve, but it was very clear that I'm looking at you now. I've got to say this, right? I used to like you and I still think that you're a good person, but you've become... I think what's happened is you became a little bit woke with regard to sexism and started to see some of the sexism in the world that previously you hadn't seen. But you're in fucking tinfoil hat territory now, right? You've got to the point where you just see it whether it exists or not. That everything, you just see sexism around every fucking corner. That isn't being woke about sexism, Steve. That's tinfoil hat territory. And You know, I respect the likes of Aaron Ram, Matt Dillonty and Seth Andrews. I don't agree with them on everything, but I respect their opinions. And they all clearly, from what they were saying, the comments that they were making about the people who were calling everybody Nazis, etc., now totally over the top and paranoid that sounded. It was you they were talking about, Steve, wasn't it? So maybe I don't expect me giving my opinions on you to have any weight whatsoever, because I know you think I'm a piece of crap. Right, but I know that you respect these people. So if you're looking at them evaluating Sargon of Akkad and thinking, yeah, these are people that can make a rational judgment on what people are like, please just consider how they're evaluating you as well. Because honestly, I just don't know where you're heading with all of this. Okay, so this was the second example that he'd given. Prior to this, he'd given another example. I'm doing these out of order because the first one, at least with the one that I've just discussed, I could understand what his argument was. The first one, I can't even fashion an argument out of it. I'll play you it now.
A friend of mine told me something recently. She's a photographer. She owns her own business and she photographs weddings and graduations and birthday parties, the usual sorts of things that photographers do to earn a living. And she also does art photography. And she's had some of her photographs published in small magazines or online journals. Recently, she noticed that a website where some of her photographs had been featured had also published work by this artist who has a reputation in the community for engaging in online harassment and being very outspoken with certain intolerant opinions. I'm sure you can picture the type of person I'm describing.
I didn't want to stop it at this point. I've written down the bits I want to stop it at, and I didn't want to stop it here, but I can't actually, listening back to it again, because I've got to refer you back to what the likes of Dillahunty and Seth Andrews said. With regard to you, there are many, many people, some of which I agree with politically, some of which I don't agree with politically, but if they made the statement you just made, I'd think, yeah, okay, I know the kind of person you mean. When you say it, that could be anybody. It could just be me, right? It could be me. And I don't think I'm a terrible fucking person. But when you say something like that, it just literally could be the nicest fucking person going, but you regard them as a fucking rape apologist and a Nazi and all, because you're so fucking over the top. You're like the boy that cried wolf. Because you call everybody these terrible things, it's practically fucking meaningless when you say it now, Stephen. Isn't that a terrible position? That's something that I don't even get any pleasure out of saying. I really don't.
My friend contacted the publisher of the website with her concerns, and she and the publisher know each other, by the way. They have been acquainted for a few years. They exchange emails from time to time. They keep each other up to date on what each of them is doing professionally. There's not a close friendship there, but there's an established relationship. And the publisher responded, and he and my friend went back and forth about this for a bit. But here's what the publisher's initial reaction was to my friend sharing these concerns with him. He said, "How was I supposed to know about this?" He didn't say, "Thanks for bringing this to my attention. I'm going to take care of this." He didn't even say, "Can you please link me to some examples of this person's problem behavior so I know what we're dealing with and I can respond accordingly?" Straight to self-defense, self-absolution. I'm innocent. What do you want from me?
Okay, Steve. So just like the previous example, I thought this was pretty mundane. But this went beyond the mundane, because I couldn't even understand the argument that you were making here. Because the whole rest of your video seemed to be about how we deal with women, how men are dealing with women, how men are interfacing with women, taking them seriously, acting sexist towards them, when women make their complaints, that we're apologising for other men, etc., etc., etc. And yet, with this example, not even you, Steve, not even fucking you, said, I think that the website owner was only acting in this fashion because it was a woman who was complaining, and if it was a man who was complaining, he wouldn't have felt the need to defend himself. He would have just gone, oh yes, I better take this person's pictures down. So as far as I'm aware, because if you felt that, I am damn sure you would have said it, you accept that probably would have given exactly the same response if it was a man who was complaining. So I didn't even see the relevance of this to the rest of the video. Personally speaking, if I gave that particular complaint, given that this was a website, according to you, where it was just showing people's photographic work, it wasn't giving their opinions. It wasn't a forum where people are giving their political opinions or their beliefs or whatever on socio-political issues. It just shows their photographs, right? So I'm being honest with you now. If I made that complaint, the response I would expect to get would be a more polite version of "wind your fucking neck in, bucko," right? What the fuck has that got to do with this website? I'm just showing people's photographs. There are people entitled to whatever positions they like. It's not as if they're espousing those positions. I mean, why should that preclude you? Honestly, Steve, you explain to me why having the wrong, right, social beliefs and attitudes should preclude you from having your photography pictures shown on a fucking website. How irrelevant is that? I actually think she's quite lucky to have got the response that she got. And honestly, right, why and even if you had given me some indication of what she'd said in her email, unless you showed me exactly what she'd said, because I know how much people misportray what they've actually said and what they claim to have said. I mean, honestly, if she'd said to him, right, this is what this guy has said on these different forums. Now, listen, I know you won't have read these forums. I know you won't know anything about this, so I'm not blaming you for that, but I'm letting you know now so that you can now perhaps do something about it if you would wish to, right? Then he wouldn't have got defensive, because he'd only be reiterating what was already said, wouldn't he? Right? If somebody says, I know you're not to blame, I know you wouldn't know, then you're not going to come back, how the fuck was I to know, would you? So I'm 90% confident that she won't have said that, right? She may have been accusatory, she may not have been accusatory. But I know if somebody levelled something like that at me, the first thing I would think is, well, I hope they don't think that I knew about this and should have done something about it. It's the obvious thing you're going to want to say first off, isn't it? If you didn't know anything about it and you think that would have made a difference, you're going to want to say, I didn't know anything about it. What the fuck is up with that? And how is that sexist? And how would he not have done that if she was a man and not a woman? None of this makes any fucking sense, Steve. Was this really the fucking best that you could come up with? I couldn't just see any merit to this example whatsoever. You weren't scraping the bottom of the barrel. You've scraped the bottom of the barrel away and you're fucking scraping around on the fucking floor. Listen, there's just one little bit right at the end, or near towards the end of Steve's video, that kind of summed up why this leaves me in such despair. So I'll just play you that clip and make a few comments, and then we'll draw this video to a close.
The thing is, there are lots of people who behave this way who do want to be seen as good guys, as open-minded, as progressive. They want people to think of them as good allies. Some of them are even pretty good at talking the talk, but when the opportunity presents itself for them to walk the walk, they reveal how shallow and useless their commitment to allyship and promoting positive change really is.
You know, I don't know how to respond to this, but I don't know how to tie this up. I've always said I wouldn't want to be an ally for anybody, and this is precisely why. It's an albatross round your neck. It means that all the reasoning that I would use every other time, I'm suddenly not allowed to use. Steve can give me the most mundane fucking example. He can give me an example of something with this email thing that has happened, that just happens to people all the fucking time. And I can know all the different reasons why this happens, right? And I can know that sometimes people won't have read the first email and read the second, that they just don't like the first person but like the second person. That they read the first email and thought, yeah, I must respond to that, but then they forget, and when they get the second, they think, oh, fuck, I should have responded to the first one. I better respond to the second one right now, because woe betide me if I forget again. I know these things happen, and Steve is absolutely fine with me knowing that. He's fine with me judging all these different possibilities under any other set of circumstance. But when we have the specific circumstance where a man is receiving the emails, a woman sent the first email and a man sent the second email, so that sexism is a fourth possibility, then not only do we assume, right, purely at face value that the guy who received the emails was sexist, but even for me as an outside observer and commenter, to suggest, well, what about these other possibilities that we would be considering under any other set of circumstances, that would be sexist for me to suggest that. That means I'm not being a good ally. To be a good ally, folks, means that I have to jump to the conclusion of sexism, even when I know that there are other possible explanations, and not ludicrous, just, pie in the sky explanations, but mundane fucking explanations that we know happen day in, day out. This is why I said, Steve, we could have a world. This is the level of tinfoil hattedness you've got to. You've got to the level of people who see coincidences as something fucking mystical and magical, when we know that the chances are that coincidences are not just possible, but coincidences are bound to happen, right? That you've got to the state where even if we had absolute equality, right, because people would still fuck up, and sometimes a woman would be on the receiving end of that fuck up, that you would still see sexism in the system. Effectively, you're creating a system where we have to be sexist. For you not to see sexism demands that the rest of us are sexist, demands that the rest of us pay more attention to women and give a higher standard of service to women, because whereas we can afford to fuck up when a man's involved, we simply cannot afford to fuck up when a woman's involved, because if we do so, you're not just going to entertain the possibility of sexism, which is fine, I'm on board with you on that, for fuck's sake, but you're going to demand that is the only explanation that we're allowed to entertain, that suddenly different rules apply, and that all these other explanations that account for every other instance of this act we cannot entertain anymore. No, we have to insist that sexism was responsible here. It's like I said earlier on, Steve, it's great, and maybe you came from a place where you didn't see any sexism, and then you had a bit of a wake up and you thought, do you know what, sexism does exist in our society, and I've been kind of blind to this, and that is marvellous, Steve. If that has happened to you, that is marvellous, but that does not preclude this journey to fucking paranoid tinfoil hattedness that seemingly you've embarked on now, where just the most mundane fucking shit you're seeing as sexism, and nobody is allowed to even pull you up and say, for fuck's sake, Steve. Right? If the genders or sexes of the people in any other permutation, you would see that there are other alternative explanations, reasonable, not outlandish explanations, reasonable explanations. But you've become so devout, so paranoid in seeing sexism around every single fucking corner, that you will not entertain any other explanation when a woman is on the receiving end of it. Okay, I'm just depressed by this. I'm not just depressed for Steve, but because I know that Steve is not the only Steve out there, that there are many, many people who see this, not just on the feminist side, by the way, on the men's rights side as well, and that equality is not enough, that they will always see that little paranoid thing whenever a man's getting a bad deal or whenever a woman's getting a bad deal, it's got to be due to sexism. Yes, there are these other fucking reasons, but it can't be that. It can't be that in this fucking instance. It's just so fucking depressing. Okay, well, it's also depressing being on this laptop. Back to the computer next month, so I guarantee you things will look a little bit better. Okay, thank you for watching. Bye for now.